The meeting had lasted 40 minutes. It felt like 40 days. Lenora Price stood alone on the upper balcony of the Lyric Theater, one hand on the cold iron railing, the city sprawling gray and indifferent below her. She had not planned to cry. She had not planned a lot of things lately. Down on the work floor, one man was still moving, measuring, marking, doing the quiet, exact work that did not stop just because the sun had gone down. Donovan Reed. He looked up and saw her face. Most men would have looked away. He didn't. She said it before she could stop herself. "I wish I had a happy family like yours." He set down his pencil and his tape. He looked at her steady, no smile, no hesitation. "Then marry me." Lenora went still. He wasn't joking. She was certain of that. What she was not certain of was whether that made it better or worse. If this is your first time here, welcome. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications because we tell one story like this every week, and you'll want to see how this one ends. Now let's get into it. The Lyric Theater had stood empty for 13 years, and its bones were still good. Anyone who understood buildings could see at the arched entryway, the hand-laid tile in the lobby, the original proscenium stage with its carved oak frame. Alton Price had seen it too. That was why in the last months of his life he had signed the restoration contract and made the Lyric the final project of Price Heritage Group. His assistant had called it a statement. Lenora thought it looked more like a promise, one she was now responsible for keeping. She had inherited the company 8 months ago along with its debt, its doubt, and its board of directors. The debt she could quantify to the dollar. The doubt was harder. Price Heritage was underfunded 2 projects behind schedule and led by a woman who, according to at least 3 board members, had yet to demonstrate the seasoned judgment the company requires. They said it in formal language. They meant it plainly. Gideon Shaw was the most elegant about it. He had been Alton's longest business partner, and he wore that history like a badge, referencing it whenever Lenora pushed back on anything. "Your father trusted me," he liked to say. He never spoke the second half of the sentence aloud. He never needed to, and you should too. The immediate pressure came from Preston Carr. His family's development group had been circling Price Heritage for 2 years, and now Gideon had formalized what Lenora had long suspected was the plan all along. Carr Urban Group would supply the capital to keep the Lyric alive in exchange for a merger. The unspoken condition delivered privately by Preston himself was simpler than that. He wanted to marry her. Not because he wanted a wife. Lenora had read enough acquisition documents to recognize one when it was handed to her in the form of a prenuptial agreement. She had not yet given her answer. She had 30 days to give one. Donovan Reed had been Alton's personal pick for the Lyric crew, and that alone made him unusual. Alton Price did not involve himself in contractor assignments. Lenora had pulled the file when she took over and found no explanation, only a line in her father's handwriting, "Trust this man's eye." On site, the instruction made sense. Donovan worked with a stillness that stood out against the noise of construction. He caught problems before they became failures. A load-bearing wall. The original plans had misread a section of subfloor. The engineers had approved that he had quietly reinforced anyway. He never made a show of being right. He simply fixed the thing and moved on. He also left at exactly the same time every day without exception. Lenora learned why on a Tuesday afternoon when she stayed late over materials and found a girl sitting on the front steps of the theater, 9 years old, backpack at her feet, drawing in a small notebook. Amaya Reed had gotten out of school early and come to wait. She sat with the particular stillness of a child who had learned to be comfortable in adult spaces. Lenora paused in the doorway. Amaya looked up, took her measure with calm brown eyes, and went back to her drawing without a word. Every few minutes, the girl glanced toward her father, not anxiously, just checking the way you check on something you are certain is still there. It was the most uncomplicated trust Lenora had ever seen. She stood in the doorway longer than she meant to before she walked away. Calvin Rhodes handled site security. He and Donovan went back further than the Lyric job, though neither of them said so out loud. On a Wednesday in the 3rd week, Calvin was walking the material storage area when a supplier code on a newly delivered shipment of structural steel made him stop mid-stride. He stood there a moment. Then he took out his phone and photographed the code from 3 angles. That evening, he sent Donovan a text. "Need to talk, not here." Lenora did not know about the text. She did not know about the steel. What she knew was that the project was running behind. The board was running out of patience, and she was eating dinner alone at her desk again, while somewhere across the city Donovan Reed was going home to his daughter. She told herself it didn't bother her. She was a convincing liar most of the time. The closed session ran 90 minutes. When it ended, Lenora walked out knowing exactly what had been decided and exactly how little her opinion had mattered. Gideon had called it a strategic alignment meeting. In plain terms, it was a countdown. Carr Urban Group would pull its funding from the Lyric if Lenora did not accept Preston's proposal within 30 days. Not the merger, the marriage. One condition enabled the other. Without Preston's personal commitment, Carr Urban would not move. Without Carr Urban's capital, the Lyric would halt. If the Lyric halted, the board had the votes to remove her. Preston had given her the prenuptial agreement in a manila envelope as if it were a routine contract. She read it that night at her desk. The language was layered and technical, but the effect was simple. After the marriage, the Carr family would hold advisory authority over executive hiring, veto rights on capital allocation, and a controlling interest in Price Heritage's core real estate assets. It was not a prenuptial agreement. It was a transfer of ownership with a wedding attached. Lenora set it aside and did not sleep. The problem with the steel arrived the next morning, and Donovan brought it to her directly, which she respected. He didn't go around her. He didn't file with the project manager first. He walked into her side office, laid a photograph on the table, and told her a new shipment of structural steel had come in with an altered certification. The load ratings had been adjusted upward. The supplier code matched no vendor on the approved list. The project manager, Gideon, had placed on site. A careful, agreeable man named Dennis had already reviewed the shipment and signed off on it. Lenora ordered an independent check and told Donovan she would have answers within 48 hours. She had them in 12. The storage room where the original delivery records were kept had been entered after hours. The paper files for the steel shipment were gone. The access log had been wiped. What Lenora did not know was that Calvin had already seen this coming. He had been watching the storage area since the night he photographed the supplier code. He saw who went in. He noted the time, the direction, and the fact that the man carried a bag out that he had not carried in. Calvin documented all of it and said nothing. He was building something, and he was not ready to use it yet. That evening, Donovan told her the supplier code matched a vendor he had crossed paths with before under circumstances that ended badly. He kept his voice flat when he said it. Lenora noticed the flatness and filed it away. She told him she believed him. She told him she would handle it. Walking back through the theater's main hall that night, she found herself thinking about what it meant that her father had chosen this man specifically. Alton Price had been meticulous. He didn't make sentimental choices in business. If he had put Donovan Reed on this project, there was a reason beyond craftsmanship, and she had never asked what it was. She decided she would. In the board meeting that week, Rochelle Bennett sat at the far end of the table and said very little. She'd been on the board since Alton founded the company, which made her its longest-serving member, and in Gideon's framing, a sentimental holdover. Rochelle did not appear bothered by the description. After the meeting, once most people had filed out, she fell into step beside Lenora in the hallway. She didn't slow down or turn to look at her. She simply said quietly, "Alton never made decisions under pressure. He made them in spite of it." Then she kept walking. Lenora stood in the empty hall and thought about the 30-day clock that had already started, about Preston's envelope on her desk, about a 9-year-old girl on stone steps drawing certain her father was coming back. Then she went back to work. She found Donovan on the 3rd floor checking a run of original plaster molding the crew hadn't touched yet. He finished what he was doing before he turned around. "I've been thinking about what you said," she told him. "Which part?" "The part that wasn't a joke." He turned then and looked at her the same way he had on the balcony, directly, without performance. "It wasn't. I know, that's why I'm here." She kept her voice even. She told him she was not going to marry Preston. She had decided that the night she read the prenuptial agreement, and nothing since had changed it. But she also told him she could not answer his proposal. Not like this, not while she was cornered. If she accepted any marriage as a way out of a crisis, she was still letting the crisis choose for her, and that was one thing she was not willing to do. "I moved you," Donovan said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, but that's not enough. Not right now." He nodded once slowly. He didn't argue. He didn't look wounded. He received what she'd said and let it stand, and that restraint more than anything else made her trust him a little more than she had before. Then she told him what she needed. Price Heritage had 30 days to find alternative funding, something with no Carr family clause attached to it. She knew Donovan had relationships in the trades and preservation circles, in the kind of mid-level networks that never showed up on a board member's contact list. She wanted his help. "You're asking me to walk back into rooms I left on bad terms," he said. "I'm asking you to help me find one room you haven't burned yet." She paused. "I know that's not a small thing." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he had 3 conditions. She would commission an independent inspection of every material currently on site. No workers would be let go to close the capital gap, whatever the board said. And any new investor would agree in writing that they held no authority over executive decisions or personal matters. Those aren't negotiable. They weren't going to be, she told him. The light rig fell without warning. One moment Lenora was standing near the center of the hall reading a floor plan. The next, Donovan was moving, crossing the distance between them without hesitation, and pulling her sideways as a section of overhead rigging came down in a crash of aluminum and cable. He put himself between her and the impact. She felt the force of it through him, a hard shudder as metal struck his shoulder. They stayed still a moment in the dust and the silence. Then he looked up at the anchor point where the rig had hung, let go of her, and climbed to examine it. She watched his face change. Not dramatically, just a tightening around the eyes, a stillness that meant he had found something he recognized. The cable had been cut. Not frayed, not worn. Cut most of the way through, clean enough to hold weight until it didn't. Calvin appeared from the far end of the hall, moving fast. He looked at the fallen rig, then up at the anchor point, then at Donovan. Something passed between them. Not surprise, only confirmation. Calvin's jaw tightened. He said nothing. He had been near because he was watching, and he had arrived too late, and that was its own kind of answer. Lenora understood then that this was not structural failure. Someone had planned it, someone who knew her schedule, who knew where she would stand. "They're trying to frighten you," Donovan said. "Or worse." "I know." "Then you understand why I'm agreeing to help, not because of who you are, because of what they're doing." She refused Preston at the next board meeting out loud on the record in front of Gideon and the full committee. She said she would find alternative funding within 30 days, and that Price Heritage Group was not for sale in any form. Gideon told her she was making an irreversible mistake. At the far end of the table, Rochelle Bennett listened, and when Lenora finished speaking, Rochelle did not look away. They started with the preservation funds. 11 organizations in the city held active capital for historic restoration. Within a week, 7 had declined. On the surface, the reasons varied: timing, portfolio commitments, internal review cycles, but the pattern was identical. Each conversation ended abruptly, usually within 24 hours of an initial expression of interest. Donovan began tracking the timing. He showed Lenora the list on a Thursday evening, the names in order, each followed by the date it withdrew. "Someone is calling ahead of us," he said. "Preston," she said. "Or Gideon, or both." The remaining funds were no better. 2 of them received what their directors later described as informal warnings from Carr Urban Group, not threats exactly, just suggestions that their other partnerships might suffer if they moved forward with Price Heritage. The message worked without leaving a trace. Gideon added a layer of his own, telling board contacts that Lenora's removal was a matter of when, not if. Word moved fast in those circles. By the second week, 3 prospective investors had cited leadership uncertainty as their reason for passing. So Donovan changed the pitch. Instead of leading with financial projections, he restructured it around impact. Fully restored, the Lyric would be the largest employer in its immediate neighborhood for the length of the build. It would create apprenticeship placements for local construction workers. The finished building could house a technical library, a community stage, a vocational training program. He had numbers, not estimates, but figures sourced from comparable projects in comparable neighborhoods. One evening, he brought Amaya to a late prep session because there was no one else to watch her. She worked through her homework in the corner while the 2 of them reviewed materials. Near midnight, Lenora was cross-checking a column of figures and missed a formatting error that had cascaded through 3 rows. "That column's wrong starting at row 3, Amaya said without being asked, without looking up. Lenora checked. The girl was right. Donovan said nothing. He simply watched Lenora look at his daughter, then back at him, and something shifted in the room, not dramatically, but permanently. Lenora was no longer admiring a family from a distance. She was watching two real people absorb the same uncertainty she was without complaint at midnight, with homework still unfinished. The ambush came on a Friday. They were meeting with a small regional bank whose director had shown real interest. Midway through the presentation, a group of a dozen people appeared outside the glass entrance holding signs that accused Lenora of wage theft and Price Heritage of unsafe labor practices. A camera crew materialized from across the street within minutes. None of the people outside were on Donovan's crew. He knew every face on his team. When a man in a dark jacket pushed through the lobby doors, moved straight at Lenora and reached inside his coat, Donovan stepped in front of her and caught the man's forearm before whatever he was reaching for came out. He applied enough pressure to stop the motion no more and held it until building security arrived. The object was a wrench. The intent had not been violence. It had been provocation. If Donovan had reacted harder, it would have been on camera, a black man physically confronting a white man in a bank lobby, surrounded by protesters with cameras already rolling. The story would have written itself. Donovan had not given them the story. Instead, he stood at the front of the room and produced a document listing the names and daily pay records of every worker on the Lyric site. Then he showed the production company registration for the media crew. It traced back to a communications firm that shared a mailing address with a Car Urban subsidiary. The bank director asked everyone else to leave the room. When Lenora thanked him afterward, Donovan was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Your father once stood in front of a room full of people to defend me. I'm only doing what he did." She stopped walking. "What does that mean?" He looked at her, and for the first time she saw something close to hesitation. "It means we should probably have that longer conversation soon." She wanted to ask right then. She didn't, because part of her already sensed the answer would change things, and she wasn't sure she was ready for things to change before she had finished what she came to do. Calvin had reached Elaine Porter before either of them thought to. Lenora learned this only after the fact. While she and Donovan worked the preservation fund list, Calvin had been running a parallel effort, quiet, unsanctioned, and more effective than anything they had managed through official channels. He had contacted Elaine directly, not as a representative of Price Heritage, but as an individual with documentation. He sent her photographs. Inspection records, the supplier code from the steel shipment cross-referenced against public records from a construction project a decade old. He told her a restoration was being deliberately undermined, that the evidence was being destroyed in stages, and that she should look before it disappeared. Elaine looked. So when Calvin introduced Donovan at a meeting arranged through a mutual contact in the Trades Council, Elaine already knew the name. That was why she agreed to sit down. And it was why, when Donovan and Lenora entered the room, she skipped the pleasantries. "I know who you are," she said to Donovan. "I know what happened 10 years ago. I need you to tell me your version before I hear anyone else's." He told it plainly. He had been a co-founder of a structural engineering firm contracted by Car Urban Group to design a mid-rise residential complex on the east side of the city. Midway through construction, Donovan had found a problem with the load-bearing materials, steel and concrete, both sourced from a supplier the Carr family had an undisclosed financial relationship with. The materials did not meet code. Under the projected occupancy load, sections of the structure were at risk. He ordered an evacuation of the surrounding units. The Carr legal team moved within 48 hours. The original inspection documents were amended. His co-founder, under pressure, signed a revised report. The contractor of record submitted a version of events in which Donovan had acted alone and without basis, disrupting a compliant project and breaching his obligations. Gideon Shaw, then outside counsel for one of Carr Urban's holding companies, managed the document trail. Several hours after the evacuation, a portion of the parking structure and the main corridor ceiling collapsed. No one was inside. The official record blamed an isolated material defect unrelated to the concerns Donovan had raised. His engineering license was suspended pending review. His firm dissolved. His co-founder settled quietly and moved to another city. Alton Price had read the original report, the real one filed before the amendments, because he sat on a city infrastructure committee that had been copied on early documentation. He believed it. He was one of the very few who said so publicly. Lenora listened to all of it without interrupting. When Donovan finished, the room was quiet. Elaine looked at her notes. Lenora looked at the careful, practiced neutrality of Donovan's face and understood this was a story he had told before, not often, but enough times to have learned how to tell it without breaking. "My father helped you," she said. It was not quite a question. "Yes, he got me a lawyer. He kept the original documents, and then he gave me work. When my wife was sick, he made it possible for me to keep working and still be home." Donovan's voice did not change, but something behind it did. When she died, he kept the contracts coming. He didn't make it charity. He made it a job. And the lyric he called me 6 weeks before he passed. He said he had a project that needed someone who wouldn't cut corners. He also said he thought someone might try to interfere with it. Donovan met her eyes. "He asked me to make sure the work was done right. He didn't ask me to manage you or report on you. He said if she decides to fight, help her see clearly. Don't decide for her." Lenora rose from the table and walked to the window. Below, the street held ordinary traffic pedestrians, a food cart on the corner. "You should have told me this from the beginning." "Yes. I've spent the last 3 weeks telling myself I was different from Preston because I wasn't using you. But you were already in a position I didn't choose and didn't know about." "That's true." She turned around. "I need time." He did not reach for her. He didn't argue. He nodded. "Take it." Elaine looked between them and said quietly that Heritage Renewal Fund would be prepared to move forward pending a clean safety audit. Then she gathered her papers and gave them the room. The file appeared on a Monday morning. Gideon had sent it to 3 board members, 2 city contacts, and a financial journalist before Lenora ever saw it, and by the time she did, it had already reached Elaine Porter's office. The document was a reconstructed incident report from the East Side collapse, the amended version, the one the Carr legal team had built 10 years earlier, with a summary describing Donovan Reed as an engineer whose reckless conduct had caused public panic and cost investors millions. Attached to it was an email. The header carried Donovan's address. The message, dated 2 weeks earlier, outlined an arrangement in which he would receive a 5% equity stake in the Lyric in exchange for facilitating the introduction to Heritage Renewal Fund. Lenora read it twice. The formatting was right. The address was right. The language was not. She knew how Donovan wrote. She had seen enough of his site reports, his terse, precise notes. This read like someone who had studied those notes and then written around them. Close but assembled like a room decorated to look lived in. She called him. He came within the hour. "It's fabricated," she said, setting it in front of him. He read it. "Yes, Gideon has my email address. He had enough documentation to make this look credible." She sat back. "Elaine's board has paused the decision. I want to put out a statement." "Don't." He said it without hesitation. "Not yet. A statement without evidence is just a counterclaim. We need the original report, the real one, the version your father kept. That's the only thing that makes this fall apart. Calvin thinks he knows where it is. Then we need Calvin to move before Gideon realizes what he has." That evening, Lenora went into the storage annex alone. She wanted to pull certain material certifications personally before anyone else could touch them. She had almost found what she was looking for when she heard the door lock behind her. She turned. Dennis stood at the entrance with a key in his hand and an expression that did not belong to the agreeable man she had known for 3 months. He held her eyes for a single moment. Then he reached to his left and opened a utility panel on the wall. The fire started in the corner fast and chemical smelling. Not an accident. A preparation. She moved to the back of the room and called Donovan. The connection broke twice. She got 4 words out clearly before the smoke reached her. "The annex, it's locked." He came through this door in under 6 minutes. He pulled her toward the exit, his arm across her back, and they were nearly clear when a section of overhead shelving came down, old metal heavy, displaced by the heat. It caught his right shoulder and the upper left of his rib cage. He did not stop moving. He kept his body angled between her and the falling steel until they were outside. Then he sat down on the pavement and did not get up. Amaya reached the hospital 40 minutes after Donovan was admitted. She sat beside his bed and did not speak to anyone for a long time. When Lenora came in, Amaya looked up with the same calm brown eyes she'd had on the theater steps. But what was behind them now was different. "My mom got sick," Amaya said. "My dad was sad for a long time after." She paused. "Every time he's with you, he gets hurt." Lenora didn't answer. There was no answer that would have been fair to give a 9-year-old who wasn't wrong. She waited in the hallway until Donovan woke. When she came back in, he looked at her and said without preamble, "I didn't go back in there because of your father. I went in because the thought of you not walking out was something I couldn't—" He stopped. "I couldn't breathe past it." Lenora stood at the foot of the bed. She believed him. That was the problem. She believed him and still didn't know how to hold that without losing the thread of something she had been trying to hold on to for herself. "I know," she said. "I just need to finish this first." She left without saying what "this" meant. She thought he understood anyway. The Heritage Renewal Fund sent its notice on a Wednesday. The language was formal and brief. Pending resolution of questions regarding the professional history of associated personnel and the provenance of recently submitted documentation, the fund was suspending its investment consideration indefinitely. Elaine had signed it herself. She had also, Lenora learned through a mutual contact, personally called to say she was sorry that she had believed what she heard in that room, but her board did not answer to her beliefs. 24 hours later, the Price Heritage Board called an emergency session. The vote was not close, 7-2 in favor of suspending Lenora's executive authority pending a governance review. The stated reason was failure to secure alternative funding within the agreed timeline. The actual reason was that Gideon had spent 2 weeks making sure the vote would go the way it went before anyone sat down. Rochelle cast one of the 2 dissenting votes. She did not explain herself to the room. She said only on the record that she stood by her vote and would account for it in time. Gideon assumed interim executive authority before the session ended. That afternoon, he signed a letter of intent with Carr Urban Group, transferring a controlling interest in Price Heritage's core assets. Preston announced the following day that the Lyric restoration would be redesigned. The historic stage, the original proscenium, the carved oak frame, the hand-laid details that had survived 13 years of abandonment, all of it would be demolished to accommodate a commercial retail component. He called it a modernization. It was the erasure of everything Alton Price had meant the project to be. Calvin was arrested on Thursday morning. The charge was misappropriation of confidential business records. 2 officers arrived at the site at 7 a.m. and walked him out in front of the crew. He didn't resist. He had known it was possible. What he had not anticipated was the timing. Gideon had moved faster than expected, which meant someone had told him Calvin was close to being ready. The original report, the one Alton had preserved the document that would unravel both the amended version and the fabricated email in a single reading, was in Calvin's possession when he was taken in. Rochelle learned about the arrest within the hour. She called her personal attorney before she called anyone else. The press ran the story efficiently and cruelly. Donovan Reed, it said, was a disgraced engineer whose license had been suspended a decade earlier following professional negligence. He had been privately sponsored by the late Alton Price, a philanthropic gesture the framing implied toward a man otherwise discredited. His involvement in Price Heritage's funding search had been undisclosed and self-interested. The fabricated email was reproduced in 2 of the articles treated as documentary evidence. Donovan read the coverage from a hospital bed without visible reaction, which Amaya noticed from her chair beside him. "You keep doing this," she said. He looked at her. "Doing what? Getting hurt for other people and then not saying anything. You never told anybody what really happened back then. You just stopped. You let them say whatever they wanted and you went quiet." She paused. "Why do you always protect everyone except yourself?" He did not answer right away. He looked at the ceiling, then at his daughter, and the question stayed in the room between them. She wasn't wrong, and he knew it. 10 years of careful silence, of building something small and stable and protective. He had told himself it was for her sake. Sitting in the wreckage of it now, he wasn't certain anymore whose sake it had actually been for. Lenora found out about the transfer signing from a news alert on her phone. She sat in her car in the parking structure across from a building she no longer had access to and read the announcement twice. Then she opened her site plans for the Lyric and looked at the section she had flagged 3 weeks earlier. The main stage roof, the load-bearing configuration Donovan had identified as dependent on materials that had never been properly certified. Preston was planning a ceremony at the Lyric in 2 days. He was planning to hold it on that stage. Donovan left the hospital at 6 in the morning. He did not sign himself out properly. He dressed carefully to spare the shoulder and took the stairs. Amaya had gone home with a neighbor the night before, and he had told her he would rest. He had meant it when he said it. Then he had watched the live setup feed from the Lyric on his phone and stopped being able to mean it. The ceremony crew had been working since midnight. Preston wanted the event to look finished, authoritative, a done thing, rather than a beginning. They had brought in suspended lighting arrays, 2 large projection screens, a speaker system that all required overhead rigging, and every bit of it was going up on the main stage. The same stage whose roof load Donovan had flagged. The same uncertified materials still in place. On the small screen of his phone he could see how one of the central beams was sitting. It had shifted not much but enough. When the full electrical load of the lighting system came on, the distribution across those beams would exceed what the compromised materials could hold. He had run the numbers twice, and twice they came out the same. Before he left, he stopped in the doorway and called Amaya. She answered immediately, which told him she had not been sleeping either. He told her where he was going and why. She was quiet a moment, then said, "Go, but this time say it out loud. Don't just protect people and then go quiet. Say what's true in front of everyone." A pause. "Promise me." He promised. Then he went. He called Lenora from the car. She answered on the first ring. "I'm on my way," she said before he could speak. "So am I." She arrived at the theater's side entrance at the same time he did, and they walked in together. The main hall was full shareholders' press, 3 city council members, 24 car urban partners. Preston stood near the stage in a dark suit, working the room with the ease of a man who considered the outcome settled. Gideon was near the back talking to a cluster of board members. Lenora walked directly to the stage. She raised her voice clear without a microphone, the way her father had taught her to address a room when she was 12 from the diaphragm without apology. "This building is not safe for occupancy. The load-bearing structure above this stage has not been certified with compliant materials. If the lighting system is activated, this ceiling will fail." The room turned uneven. Some people looking, some murmuring, a few moving instinctively toward the exits. Preston gestured to his security team. Donovan stepped in front of Lenora before the first man reached her. "Nobody touches her until an engineer has looked at that ceiling," he said. His voice was quiet. It carried anyway. "You don't have standing here," Preston said. "Either of you." "Maybe not legally," Donovan said, "but I have 10 years of structural engineering, and I'm telling you that beam has moved since yesterday. You can remove us after you've evacuated the building." Gideon spoke from the back. "This man has a suspended license and a documented history of fabricating safety concerns for personal gain. I would ask everyone to—" "That document is fraudulent." The voice came from the main entrance. Rochelle Bennett walked in with Elaine Porter on her left and a lawyer on her right. Behind them, moving more slowly, was Calvin Rhodes. Rochelle had posted his bail that morning, and he had come straight from processing, still in yesterday's clothes. He was carrying a file. Rochelle addressed the room without raising her voice. "I have been a board member of this company for 23 years. I have not spoken publicly about what I know until now because I was waiting for the complete record. I have it." She looked at Gideon steadily. "All of it." The beam cracked before anyone had finished processing the entrance. Not catastrophically, not yet a sound like something giving up, low and structural from directly above the stage. Donovan heard it and turned to the crowd. "Everyone out! Left and right exits, not the center aisle! Move now!" He said it with the authority of someone who had done this before, who had stood in a building that was deciding whether to fall and known exactly what the sounds meant. People moved. Lenora stayed. She took the right side of the hall, directing people, checking rows, pulling a woman who had frozen near the third column back into the moving line. Donovan took the left. They worked without a word between them, each covering ground, neither watching the other, both aware of exactly where the other was. A section of decorative plaster fell from the upper wall near where Donovan stood. Lenora crossed the distance in 4 steps and pulled him forward by the arm. He moved. They kept going. The last person cleared the door 30 seconds before a portion of the stage roof came down. The footage was on every local news channel by noon, not the collapse, the evacuation. Donovan moving through the hall with a shoulder that visibly wasn't working right, directing 200 people toward the exits, with the calm precision of someone who had done this calculation before and been proven right. Lenora beside him, not behind him, working the opposite side of the room, filling gaps, pulling people by the arm. The moment she crossed the floor to pull him clear of the falling plaster ran on 4 stations. The stage roof came down at 9:47 a.m. No one was in the building. Calvin's file was 41 pages. It contained the original structural report from the East Side collapse, time-stamped before the Carr legal team's amendments. It contained a chain of internal memos between Gideon Shaw and a Carr urban attorney discussing how to reassign liability. It contained supplier records linking the falsified steel certification at the Lyric to the same vendor network used a decade earlier. And it contained Alton Price's signed statement written 14 months before his death, notarized and witnessed, describing what he had read on the City Infrastructure Committee and what he believed was being concealed. Elaine's legal counsel submitted the file to the city's building authority, the district attorney's office, and the Price Heritage Board simultaneously. Gideon's attorney called for a recess that no one granted. The board met that afternoon in a conference room at Elaine's offices. The session lasted 3 hours. Rochelle spoke for the first 40 minutes methodically, without drama, laying out a timeline that reached back to the original Carr urban contract and forward to the fabricated email and the Lyric stage setup. She had documentation for most of it. For the parts she didn't, Calvin did. The vote to reinstate Lenora was 6-2, with Gideon abstaining. The letter of intent with Carr Urban was voided on the grounds that it had been executed by an interim authority acting outside its mandate. Preston's legal team contested this for about 72 hours until the supplier records made further contesting inadvisable. Gideon resigned before he was formally asked to. His resignation letter cited personal reasons. The legal process that followed took months. Gideon faced charges related to fraud, document falsification, and the concealment of a known structural defect in the original East Side project. Preston faced civil and criminal liability for organizing a public gathering in a building whose danger he had been warned about on the record in front of witnesses on camera. Dennis, the site manager who had locked Lenora in the annex, cooperated fully with investigators in exchange for reduced charges, and his testimony filled the last gaps. Donovan's engineering license was reinstated. The formal record was amended. A city official released a statement acknowledging that the East Side evacuation had been appropriate and that the collapse had confirmed the concerns he had raised. The statement was 6 paragraphs. It had taken 10 years to exist. Donovan read it once and set it down. He did not go back to affirm. Instead, he filed incorporation papers for a new entity. Small, independently funded, focused on restoration work in neighborhoods where buildings were structurally neglected because the communities around them lacked the leverage to demand otherwise. Calvin came on as operations manager. Lenora restructured the board before she restructured anything else. Rochelle stayed at Lenora's personal request. Elaine joined as an independent director. The new governance documents included a clause that no single investor or family interest could hold more than 15% of voting shares. Price Heritage secured its Lyric funding through 11 separate sources. Heritage Renewal Fund, 4 community development lenders, 2 construction trade unions, and 4 local business coalitions. No single party held enough weight to make demands. That was the point. The Lyric Theater reopened on a Saturday in early spring. The ceremony was smaller than the one Preston had planned deliberately, so no projection screens, no suspended arrays, no attempt to fill the room with the appearance of power. Just the building itself restored to what it had been and then made into something more. The carved oak proscenium refinished, the original tile cleaned and intact. The lobby turned into a reading room. Upstairs, 2 rooms converted into vocational training space. The community stage was booked through the summer. Price Heritage's new offices occupied the East Wing. Lenora spoke for 11 minutes. She talked about her father, not the version in board minutes and press releases, but the one she had been learning about over the past several months, the man who had read a report no one else was willing to read, who had driven across the city to sit in a room with a stranger and say plainly, "I believe you," who had understood that the most durable thing he could leave behind was not a company or a building, but a set of decisions made correctly early enough to matter. Then she introduced Donovan. She said his name and his title, lead restoration engineer, Lyric Theater Project, and told the room what he had done 10 years ago clearly and on the record in a room full of people who would repeat it. She said he had evacuated a structure that later collapsed and had spent a decade living with the consequences of being right. She said Price Heritage was in the habit of correcting the record when it had been wrong, and that today was one of those corrections. Donovan, seated in the second row beside Amaya, did not appear comfortable with any of it. Amaya sat very straight and paid close attention to everything, including the parts about her father's past she was hearing in full for the first time. Not just the part where he got hurt, but the part where he had been right and no one had let him be right and he had kept going anyway. After the guests cleared out, Lenora found him on the upper balcony. She had known he would go there. She wasn't sure she'd known she was going to follow until she was already on the stairs. He stood at the railing, looking out at the city the way she had that first night. Except the light was different now, afternoon gold instead of evening gray, and the building behind them was finished. "You said something up here the first night," she said. "I remember. I said I wished I had a happy family like yours, and I told you to marry me." He turned to look at her. "I've thought about that a lot. Whether it came from the right place. Did it?" He was quiet a moment. "Your father gave me work when I had nothing. He kept a document safe for 10 years because he thought it might matter someday. He sent me here because he trusted my judgment." He paused. "But he never told me to love you." That part wasn't in the arrangement. He reached into his jacket pocket. What he held on the railing between them was a ring, simple, considered nothing excessive. "I'm not asking because there's a crisis to solve," he said. "I'm not asking to settle a debt or protect you from something. You don't need any of that from me." He looked at her steadily. "I'm asking because I've watched you hold a room together when everything in it was trying to fall, and I'd like to spend a significant amount of time watching you do that. Lenora Price, do you want to build something together?" She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Yes. Behind them, from the direction of the stairwell door, a voice said, "Finally." Amaya walked onto the balcony with the composure of someone who had been waiting and was not going to pretend otherwise. She looked at her father, then at Lenora, then at the ring. "I've been patient since the hospital," she said. Donovan laughed genuinely fully the way Lenora had not heard him laugh before. Amaya stepped forward and took Lenora's hand. Not because anyone asked her to. She simply decided and did it the way she had learned from watching her father. When something is right, you don't wait for permission. The three of them stood on the balcony of the Lyric Theater while the city went on below them, ordinary and indifferent, completely unaware that something had just been decided that had been a long time coming. Alton Price gave Donovan Reed a second chance when no one else would. Donovan carried that forward not as a debt, but as a practice, a way of moving through the world that says, when you can stand between someone and an injustice, stand there. When you can tell the truth in a room that doesn't want to hear it, tell it. And here is what this story keeps coming back to. A real act of kindness doesn't put a price on the person it helps. Alton didn't save Donovan to own him. He saved him because it was right and trusted that a man like Donovan would find his own way to pass it forward. That is harder than it sounds. It means helping someone without keeping score. It means standing up for what's true, even when staying quiet would be easier. It means letting the people you love make their own choices, even when you think you know better. Donovan protected Lenora, but he never tried to decide for her. And that, more than the ring, more than the rescue, more than any grand gesture, is what made her choose him. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, every week we bring you stories about people who chose integrity over convenience and kept going when everything was working against them. We'll see you in the next one.